As I said, we will pick it up in chapter 11. Um, and well, again, I ask this every week, so you guys should be ready for this question. Before we get into chapter 11, is there? Can anybody sort of give us a little bit of a review or a couple highlights of what we looked at last week? And don't wait for Pastor because he lost his voice. So we're down one on the bench. So I'll give you a hint. We were in chapter 10. Yes. Mm. 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 Yeah. Um, Boy, I wish I could remember. I was studying last night um, for this morning's. It's a new word there. We can write that down. This morning's sermon. I came across a line in Psalms, and golly, I don't remember where it was, but David said, "Lord, I pray, or I praise you, when the righteous man strikes me, when the righteous one rebukes me." And I was like, "Wow, that was a powerful line." It was a song of praise from David for when the righteous one strikes him. I was like, that's kind of along that lines of the bitterness of the word going down. Also, we theorize that maybe one of the reasons that it is bitter is because, uh, without getting too gross, when something turns sour, we want to expel it. But also, there's a sense in which we have to get the word out. We have to share it. Also, maybe it's a sense of, such as, the prophets who wept over Israel because they would not obey. We know the truth and we see the lost, and it breaks our heart. And so there's that bitterness. I think all of that is rolled into that. Yeah. And anybody want to give me just some quick highlights of the mighty angel that came down from heaven? Maybe what he looked like and how he presented himself. A rainbow on his forehead. Yeah. 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 His stance spanned the sea, from land across the sea to land. And yeah, humongous angel in a little scroll. Um, so today, John is given a task. He's given a job to do here. So let's pick that up. And again, this falls on the heels of, maybe I'll pick it up in verse 11 of chapter 10. After he'd given the scroll, it went down sweet and was made bitter. In verse 11, and I was told, you must again prophesy about many peoples and nations and languages and kings. And then chapter 11. Then I was given a measuring rod like a staff, and I was told, rise up, measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship there. But do not measure the court outside the temple. Leave that out, for it is given over to the nations, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. And I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And if anyone would harm them, fire pours from their mouths and consumes their foes. If anyone would harm them, this is how he is doomed to be killed. They have power to shut the sky, that no rain may fall during the days of their prophesying. And they have power over the waters to turn them into blood, to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they desire. And when they have finished their testimony, the beast that rises from the bottomless pit will make war on them and conquer them and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city that symbolically is called Sodom and Egypt, where their Lord was crucified. For 3.5 days, some from the peoples and tribes and languages and nations will gaze at their dead bodies and refuse to let them be placed in a tomb. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and make merry and exchange presents, because these 2 prophets have been a torment to those who dwell on the earth. But after the 3.5 days, a breath of life from God entered them, and they stood up on their feet, and great fear fell on those who saw them. Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying, "Come up here." And they went up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies watched them. And at that hour, there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city fell. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. The second woe has passed. Behold, the third woe is soon to come. Wow, that is a pretty stark passage, isn't it? We are getting into territory that is hotly debated here. This stuff is, I think I saw, I like this phrase. It was a study note at the bottom of my Bible. There is strong disagreement among many faithful and true Christians over the best interpretation of this passage. So we're going to set that as a baseline, that there is much disagreement between godly, Bible-believing Christians. They just straight up disagree on how to interpret this. And I would wager, if I was a betting man, which I'm not, that I disagree with some of you folks in here, and vice versa. And I would wager that some of you sitting there disagree with each other. You just don't know it yet. But so let me just say, my goal here is not to sow seeds of discord or disagreement, or to divide people into different camps and say, okay, now you stand over here, you stand over here, and you stand there. Just as with all of this text. But I do want to present to you some major positions and some major interpretations, because there's some interesting stuff to consider here. And I will tell you where I fall on this, but I encourage you guys to search these things out, research them for yourself, and enjoy the process. Have fun. I think as I've been going through Revelation, I've really been confronting this fear that I have had since a kid, and really enjoyed peeling that away and saying, this is, don't take it the wrong way, this is just another book of the Bible that can be read, that can be understood to an extent, that can be a blessing. And so let's approach it in that way. So let's start with the measuring of the temple. The question here is, what is this temple? Now, we could break it down into basically 3 majority views. Probably the most prominent view, the most widely spread view, in the Western world and in the last, I would say, 200 years, really picked up speed in the last 100 years, is this idea that this is a literal measuring, that this is a literal rebuilding of the temple. This is what the vast majority of, I think, churches would say. This is, for the sake of our discussion, we will call this a futurist view. It is a view that the temple will be rebuilt in the future. A second view, this is not as popular. I don't know a ton of people who subscribe to this view, is what's called a preterist view. And this is a view that this is foretelling the fall of the temple in AD 70, that this was written before the fall of the temple in AD 70. And that everything that's prophesied here, for as far as we're concerned, has been completed. And then the third view is a symbolic view. And that view says, we'll explain it some more. We'll go in and we'll explain each one of these in a minute. But just the shorthand of that is that this is a measuring of the true church. This is a measuring of those who have put their faith in Christ, who are sealed, as we saw earlier in the passage, sealed on the forehead with Christ's mark, with Christ's name. So let's dig in a little bit to the futurist view. Any thoughts or questions here? And just so you know, one book I have used for this particular passage, and I'm going to, in all honesty, I'm going to rely on it heavily because it lays out the arguments, the different positions very well. And I encourage you to read this book, even if you disagree with some of its premises. It's very good. This is just a commentary on Revelation by Dr. Joel Beakey. So I would encourage you to read that. When I'm done with Revelation, you're welcome to borrow it. So it's good. So futurist view. Some say that John measures in chapter 11 is a literal building that Israel will rebuild on Mount Zion. Problem with that is, one problem is that the mountain is occupied by a couple of prominent Islamic holy sites, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And so one thing that folks who are looking toward this view are looking to see is they're very interested, I think as we all are. I mean, it's Jerusalem, but they're looking for something to change in that geopolitical situation, at which time many people start to get excited and draw connections and think that the temple will be rebuilt. There is a strong push in Israel to rebuild the temple. I know that there is an organization that is working to rebuild the articles of temple worship as described in the Old Testament, and they are sitting in workshops waiting to be brought out, to be used to start the services again. I'm looking for the right word. Could you call it services? The temple services, to the rituals, the sacrifices. Once they have access to that site. And so the futurist view sees this literally happening, and they see John almost like a surveyor. Well, he's surveying, but with an eye toward construction. When the Jewish, I'll just read out of here, if this is correct, these structures would have to be demolished and replaced by a Jewish temple prior to Christ's return. When the Jewish state of Israel was established in 1948, and when Jerusalem was captured by Israel in the Six-Day War of 1967, many viewed these events as signs of imminent return of Jesus Christ. This is one reason why the futurist view became very popular among evangelicals in the 20th century. Now, any thoughts, comments, anything you guys, because I know you guys know some stuff about this as well, so anything you want to add to the information? Yes.
I think our community, Central Vermont, and Northeast, has been very much exposed to this future through Moody Broadcasting and other kinds of ways it's hard to move away from it. If you once a church or community has really complemented, I very much appreciate the way you're approaching this. And I'd just like to say one quick thing about the preterist view. I think you might wonder if this make any sense at all. But R.C. Sproul holds to this, at least in the primary way.
Yeah.
And so it's not like this isn't a bunch of slackers.
Oh yeah.
These are interesting things, how they see these.
Yeah, and I'll give you kind of a sort of a buffet here of men that I highly respect and have gleaned much from their teaching who hold each of these views. So a preterist view, you mentioned R.C. Sproul, one of my favorites. I find him exceedingly helpful and just helping me to understand the word. Ligonier Ministries, incredible ministry. Futurist view, David Jeremiah. Very, very strong Bible teacher, great man of the word, understands his Bible. And symbolic view, my favorites, the old Puritans and Dr. Joel Beakey hold to this preterist view, and full disclosure, I do too. So, or not preterist, sorry, the symbolic view. So, but that's to say, I know, and I'm being cautious here. I'm because, gosh, we all know. I remember getting into just flat out arguments, almost fist fights with my friends in high school about this and a whole host of other things. Let's not be those people. Let's just agree that we have different views on this. We're not talking about gospel critical issues here. We don't need to fall out over this. We are like kids with crayons trying to explain physics, really. I think we can all agree on that. These are future things. These are mysteries of the Lord. A couple problems that I see with the futurist view, if I could make the case for the symbolic view, is Christ very clearly foretold the destruction of the temple. It was very clearly foretold. He never, and that was tied with Israel's rejection of Christ as the Messiah. He never foretold the rebuilding of a physical temple. There's no use for it. God was putting an end to that symbology. There was no use for it in the continuing plan of his salvation. In John 4:21, Jesus tells a Samaritan woman that true worship is no longer tied to a particular place. The center of worship is no longer a mountain, a city, or a building. That the Father now seeks men and women who worship him in spirit and in truth. And then this is further expanded on, I would suggest to you, in Ephesians 2:19 through 22. Now, therefore, you are no more strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and the household of God, and are built up upon the foundation and the prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom all the building fitly framed together groweth unto a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you are also builded together for a habitation of God through the Spirit. So I would suggest to you, just in my opinion, that the church is now the temple. That you and I constitute God's temple. That in his plan of redemption, his plan for the church, the physical temple has been replaced by the true church. That's just my opinion. You could take it or leave it. And any thoughts or comments on that? And I'd love to hear, I'd like to hear maybe a different view on that too.
I don't have a view, except I think there's a biblical view. Might include different parts of these, might not.
Yeah.
I don't say I've got it.
Right.
But I do know that there are, I've been told that there are 70,000 Messianic Christians in Israel. They intend to keep the peace, but they're followers of Jesus Christ. I also know, apparently, there's a community of Jews who intend to rebuild the temple.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't want to be too dogmatic about that.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean the Christians have to build it, but it does. But there's indications in here that at some point, probably still future for us, that there's going to be a revival involving either two humans, a lot, or what they represent, a law and the prophets. I'm getting ahead of them.
No, that's good, because I had in my notes here that one thing that is not addressed here that I really want to bring forward is, while I don't think that a physical temple has a part in Christ's salvation plan, that is not to say, and that is not to exclude, that the Jewish people don't build a temple. Like, that's not a possibility. If that makes sense. And so, yeah. Right. No, I really appreciate that. I remember as a kid, I remember, it's so funny. I groan inwardly. Teenagers getting dogmatic and fighting with each other about things we barely understand. But I remember there were these battle lines drawn, and it was, you have to pick a position. And if you don't, you're either a fool and it was like, man, what were we even talking about? What did we really know about these things? I don't know if that makes sense or resonates.
Didn't we see earlier, I'm not sure which chapter, you can help me with this, didn't we see that this kind of represents a flow of history?
Yes.
Involving the Gentiles as well as the Jews, and that, this is a big picture. Could be early, it could be.
Yes.
Because it was a temple, but it also could be futuristic.
Yes.
Undoubtedly is. I mean, it's hard to think otherwise.
Now, yeah. And so here's where I'm going to kind of throw, and that's a lovely, that's a good segue. I'm going to kind of throw a hand grenade on all three of those and just kind of make it more confusing for you. I would just like to point out that Nobody's building a temple here. Did you see what we actually read? John is just called to go measure an existing temple. There's no building going on here. We often argue about this and discuss this and say, when's it going to be rebuilt? Well, is this the building of the spiritual temple? Is it? No, he says he's handed a measuring rod. Rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship there. So in our discussion of when this is going to happen, what temple is this, we've missed the point that's being made here, which I think is fun. And almost, it's like an escape valve in a way. It's like, well, okay, well, what's really being said here? Let's read this again. Then I was given a measuring rod like a staff, and I was told, rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship there. But do not measure the court outside the temple. Leave that out, for that is given over to the nations, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. So what he is being called to do is number the true believers, those who really believe. We could take the view that this is the future temple. We could take the view that this is the church. We could take the historic view that this is God's people in all ages. It doesn't change the meaning of this. He said, you have two people here. You have those who enter, the true worshipers, those who are in the presence of God. They're going about their worship, and those outside, those nominally associated with either the temple or the church. They just loosely associate with the church. And he is saying they are not numbered in the church. We're getting the sense that there's a sorting process here, much like we're going to see later of the goats and the sheep. And so it just begs a question. Are you milling around? No offense to anyone who's out there. Are you milling around in the foyer, or are you in the church? Many people in the time of John, or liked, and I think we could say even today, like to be seen in the outer court of the temple. It was a good place to be seen. And he's drawing a line between those who want to be seen in and around the temple and those who have been sealed by him, who are the true worshipers, the true devotees. Does that make sense? It's a simple point, but again, there's no construction equipment here. We're just assuming from the text that there is some temple, the temple of God is just there. It's there, and it's being measured.
I think that's an interesting application, and it applies to us. Like you said. But I think there's also a lot of biblical understanding that the Gentiles could come to the outer court of the temple.
Yes.
And that's where believing Gentiles maybe were in a process of becoming Jews.
Well, I see.
Because they knew that the living God at that point, the Shekinah glory was in the temple. And I think that this could be as an alternative. I don't, it just occurred to me naturally that from that the outer court here is referring to the Gentiles that are allowed into the inner court. This is written by a very strong Jew, a guy by the name of John. And his book and all of his writings are very Jewish in their connections and in the way he writes. This is a very Jewish book.
It is, yes.
And so I think at least it's a thought that this could be talking also about the history, because the temple was destroyed, as you said. There's no indication from Christians that there's any need for a new temple. But we're still finding millions of Christians go to Jerusalem every year and sort of trample on the outer court.
Oh, that is interesting.
They want to find out all they can about Jesus Christ and all the background that goes into it. So, I think this is just kind of an interesting statement to me, reading it and connecting it to the rest of Scripture and to history.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I like that. I wrote that down because I want to chase that down. That is an interesting line of thinking. He says it's given over to the nations. You can see that, the folks. Yeah, I like that. I'm going to chase that down. Yeah. That is. Yeah, I like that. Now we're going to get into a section that I started on this project, I think, in January is when I told the elders I was working on this. I still don't have a definitive, this is where I stand on this next one. Okay? I find many of the arguments very convincing. So let's dig in. Verse 3. Any other comments? Concerns? Contradictions? Oh. As you can see, I get really ugly when people contradict me. So. Verse 3. This is the Lord speaking. I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. And then, helpful but not helpful, he identifies the 2 witnesses. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. Well, who are these witnesses? I'm glad you asked. They're the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord. Now, we have a small thread we can go down here. If we remember back to earlier, we compared text to text, we saw the lampstands before the Lord, right? We have this very Jewish picture of the Lord in his temple maintaining the lampstands, the 7 lampstands representing all of the churches. And so maybe this is the witness of the church. Well, you say there's only 2. Yes. I have a couple theories on that, if this is what it means. If we look at the letters sent out to the 7 churches, only 2 of the churches were necessarily healthy. Only 2 of the churches, one was about to be sifted, was about to be persecuted, and it was encouragement and strengthening for the coming days. And the other one was just, he heaped encouragement and I use small p, praise on them for their behavior and their the way that they have held to the faith. There are only 2 churches. Maybe these 2 churches, maybe these 2 lampstands symbolize that. Maybe the number 2, again, sticking with the law of Deuteronomy, you need 2 witnesses to bring a charge against someone who's in violation of the law. Maybe these are the 2 witnesses. They symbolize the 2 witnesses required by the law to bring a charge against the world. They say that and the idea being that these 2 lampstands represent the church through all of history. And that number 2. Now, the 2 olive trees. What are the olive trees? So in the biblical text, it could be a number of things, but olive oil is often representative of the healing work, the holy work of the Holy Spirit. I don't see a terribly convincing case for that. And frankly, the olive tree, I don't know where that comes in. So that's one thought. Yes. That was a fig tree.
My wife is great.
Any other thoughts on if we stick with the theme that this is the church, and we're going to move on to some other suggestions. We'll just kind of play these out because I don't know. But any other suggestions on the olive trees as it relates to maybe this is the witness of the church?
Romans 10 or 11, Israel was the olive tree, and we were grafted in.
Yes. So that was going to be sort of a side view. Is this the church and the people of Israel? And does that tie into... Okay. I love it. Yeah. No, I like it. I like to keep this open and loose, and you guys are great. So please. I'm just the idiot who volunteered to teach the class. So lead the class. We'll go with that. If you're kids, I would say teach. So, so yeah, you know what? That is a brilliant idea. Let's keep reading. So we'll pick it up here. These are the olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And if anyone would harm them, fire pours from their mouths and consumes their foes. If anyone would harm them, this is how he is doomed to be killed. They have the power to shut the sky, and no rain may fall during the days of their prophesying. They have power over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they desire. And then when they have finished their testimony, the beast that rises from the bottomless pit will make war on them and conquer them and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city that symbolically is called Sodom and Egypt, where the Lord was crucified. I'll stop there for now. Another view, I would say this is the majority view, is that these are literal witnesses that will rise up. Where there is wide disagreement is who these are. Is this Moses and Elijah returning? Is this Moses and Isaiah, Elijah, Ezekiel? And there's many different views. Is this a person come back out of heaven? Is this someone who rises up like John the Baptist was representative of Elijah coming back? He wasn't Elijah, but he represented him. Is this the same kind of situation? And there's some very specific information here that you could make that connection. Anything jump out at you guys that maybe could speak to that? One thing is that specific timeline that's given. People see that as a 3.5-year ministry, just in the model of Jesus Christ, a 3.5-year ministry. It's a very specific time frame that is given, and I should tell you that is often tied back to, I don't know if you can remember all the way back to our study of Daniel. The timeline of history was broken down for Daniel, and there's this final 7-year period that is broken into two 3.5-year periods, and there is a pause between the two of them. And many folks see this. They see that 3.5 years, and they look at Daniel, and they see that this is that period. Now, there's a difference on how to interpret that. Some people see the timeline as symbolic. Some people see it as a physical 3.5 years. The majority of folks actually interpret that as a specific 3.5-year period, and that these two witnesses in the model of Christ will prophesy for 3.5 years. They see them as based on what we read in the beginning of the chapter, they see them as Jewish witnesses, one of the prophets of old. Let me give you some. Elijah, just some thoughts here. Elijah, who prophesied God's word to the nation, he spoke and brought drought. Moses, we all remember him turning the water to blood. And God told the prophet Jeremiah, in Jeremiah 5:14, I will make my words in thy mouth fire, and this people wood, and it shall devour them. And so whoever these witnesses are, we get the sense that they, whether it's the church through all of the ages, whether it's Elijah, Moses, Jeremiah, like figures, or it's actually them in the flesh returned, they will speak the words of the Lord, and that is the fire that will proceed and consume their enemies. Any thoughts or comments on that? Yes.
What would the prophecy be? What would you say the prophecy might be? They prophesied for a specific time. Something we don't know yet, or something that needs to be repeated? What could that be?
I think it's the coming of the Lord. That is my personal opinion is I tend to lean, I'm not fully convinced, I tend to lean toward the position that this is the twofold witness of the church throughout the age. I also see an argument for, but either way, I believe that this is the message that the Lord is coming again. The Lord is coming, much like in the footsteps of Jonah. In 40 days, this city will be destroyed. The Lord is coming again to establish a new kingdom. The earth and the heavens will melt away. There's a new heaven and a new earth coming, and those who put their faith in the Lord will dwell with him forever, and those who reject him will be tossed into the bottomless pit. They will face God's wrath. They will get what they wished for, eternity without God. I think that's the message. I think it's the gospel. I think it's Jesus Christ has come. But I don't know. Is it, let's say it is these two witnesses yet to come? Perhaps it is that utterance of the seven thunders that was sealed up. Maybe it's that message. I don't know.
I was looking at what they had the power to do,
Mm.
and one was to shut the sky so that rain didn't fall. And this kind of immediately points out somebody, Elijah, right?
Right.
Elijah. And then the one who was involved with turning the sea to blood, the water to blood, and striking the earth with every plague, that's Moses.
Yes.
And then we had that sermon not too long ago that Moses and Elijah came to Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration.
Yes.
And I just find that all very interesting.
Also, to add some fuel to that fire, Elijah, how did he die? Moses, what were the specifics of his death? They're ambiguous. We don't know. So some may say that he was taken up into heaven. So I think there's something to be said for that.
And I think what they represent extremely strongly.
Yes.
God and the prophet,
Yes.
which is pretty much the content of the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament. And the Proverbs and the Psalms are kind of various kind of people doing poetry and thinking about those things that God wants from us and their opposites. So they're kind of a part of it. It's writing.
Yeah.
These guys represent.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because it was in that notebook. The law and that was one other suggestion that I think holds a lot of weight, that this twofold witness is the law and the prophets, or I like this explanation. I think it's a bit of a stretch to make it for this text, is that it is the prophets and the apostles. The prophets and the apostles. That, what we have is built upon the testimony of the prophets and the apostles. I think sticking with that very Jewish theme, the law and the prophets fits a bit nicer. I think it's wishful thinking on my part to think that it's yes.
Concept of law, prophets, and understand the law is about as much as Scripture teaches us that in other places. We get convicted from that. And also, the prophets said something. Prophets had warning and good news.
Yes.
Isn't it true that when you're going to stand up there and we have to speak about, there's this law and then there's the gospel that comes forth from all of that. So maybe that is John's reflection towards what must continue until Christ returns.
Yeah. I think what we can say, even if we can't identify who these two witnesses are, we can look at their mission, its effect, and God's response. Can't we? I think we can say with surety that this we're not talking about Marvel superhero type characters here who literally shoot flame out of their mouth and consume people. We're seeing people who bring a fiery word from the Lord. This is the word of the Lord proceeding out of their mouths. They are prophets. Whether it is whoever it is, they are bringing a word from the Lord. And that's what prophets do. Earlier in the text, Christ identified himself as the one who has a tongue like a sword. And now the prophets speak fire. They speak fire. And what will happen to these witnesses? They will be killed. After their ministry, they will be killed and brought back to life. Now, those who say that this is the twofold witness of the church or the law and the prophets would say that this represents many attempts to stamp out both Judaism and Christianity. That many have claimed, like Mao Zedong, that they will, or the Soviet Union, that they will wipe out true Christianity, or like Adolf Hitler, that they will wipe out the Jewish nation, stamp it out. And from the outside, it looked like they had succeeded, only to have the Lord turn the dry bones into life again. Others will say that this is the miraculous resurrection of two physical witnesses, which is amazing too. And in both of these, we see a public resurrection and a raising to life that all the world will see. The whole world will see their triumphant resurrection and reunification with Christ. But after 3.5 days, a breath of life from God entered. Oh man, we're almost out of time. So let me read this, and then we'll pick up here again next week. And but after 3.5 days, a breath of life from God entered them. They stood up on their feet, and great fear fell on those who saw them. Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying, "Come up here." And they went up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies watched them. And then it goes very poorly for their enemies. I'll just spoiler alert. Things go pear-shaped. If we're plotting it on a graph, it ain't good. But whether these are two physical witnesses, whether this is the law and the prophets, whether this is you and me in the church sharing this burden, God has us in the palm of his hand. God will have his two witnesses in the palm of his hand. And we will be reunited with him. We will be resurrected and reunited with him. If these are two witnesses in the future, if this is the church now, the testimony of the church now, we are safe in his hands. We will be, we have been, we always have been. So, any final thoughts before we close?
There is something that can be gained even when we don't know what exactly is anyways.
Yeah.
The other thing I would think about for next week is, I don't know, like, how does this fit with 6 and 7?
Yeah.
How does this connect with the scroll that he ate? You know?
Yeah.
There's a bigger narrative that this is contributing to. I'm thinking about, like, how does that fit?
Yeah, I'm glad you went there, because I was so focused on trying to lay out these that I was concerned that at some point we got to step back and try to put it back in the context of what we've been reading and experiencing as we go through this to I got to somehow condense my notes into something palatable, something deliverable. As we say at work, I have to produce some palatable deliverables. There's some serious corporate speak for you. So, all right, thank you guys. You've been awesome.